I do remember that. Pointed that out. Thank you so much. That way I can basically all. Oh, wow, cool. Yeah, that's very cool. You told me, and then they. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know that.
Good evening, everyone. We're going to start our meeting tonight. Barbara's bits had to be postponed because Barbara was not feeling too well, so we hope she starts feeling well very soon and she'll be back with us. So just a very few couple announcements. We have a couple of events, actually 3 events, or 2 events going on this month. Donna will be doing an outreach program on landscape design at Whispering Pines on the 3rd. So if you want to come out and enjoy that, we'll be doing that on the 3rd at the meeting center, at 10:45. And then on the 15th, Ben is leading a field trip at Fort Cooper State Park. It's going to be led by one of the DEP representatives, and that will be at 9 a.m. And you need to RSVP with Ben if you want to go do that. I'm pretty sure we have a little bit of plants on the drawing table, and then Heather brought in some plants. So if you want to peruse the plants that after the meeting, you can go ahead and do that. And I believe that is all we have to announce this month, other than we need a president and we need a secretary. So please, somebody, if you'd like to step forward and volunteer, we would love to have that happen. And with that, I'd like to introduce Heather Blake from Natural Treasures Farm and Nursery.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You guys okay if I take my mask off for the presentation?
Yes.
You probably won't hear me otherwise. I'm not a great projector. So I'm Heather Blake. I'm from Trenton. I was pretty much raised in Trenton. So I've grown up in North Central Florida, which is how I developed a love for all things natural here in Florida. Our family was very active with being outdoors. We were involved in scouts and 4-H and all kinds of other things, and a lot of family trips were at state parks. So that is how I came up with my business name, Natural Treasures, because I firmly believe that our natural areas are treasures here in Florida, and we need to treat them as such. It's been a while since I've done a presentation, so bear with me. So this is a hybrid presentation. A lot of these slides are a modification from the Paynes Prairie chapter of the Native Plant Society, on which I used to be a member of the board. So we'd like to start out with what is the definition of a native plant according to the Florida Native Plant Society, which I'm sure most of you are aware is any species occurring within the state boundaries that was here prior to European contact. There are a lot of discussions that are made regarding whether or not something was actually here prior to that time or not, because a lot of plants were moved around by indigenous people, as you see here. Many of the tribes traded throughout Florida and actually throughout the eastern US, so a lot of plants traveled around. So it's hard sometimes to determine what some of those are, and it's often debated. So what is not native to Florida? Exotic species, whether they were brought here by a natural occurrence or they were brought here by people or shipping or something along those lines. If it's not native, then it is exotic. Now, there is a difference between exotic and an invasive exotic. So invasive species are non-native species that displace Florida native plants. And so those are definitely something that you do not want in your yard. One of the things that we often associate with native plants is the UF-IFAS Florida Friendly Landscape Program, which is growing, and it's a great program that they're encouraging a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of builders to put in more native plants and practice those 9 principles of Florida Friendly landscapes. And I found out about a month or so ago that the native plant landscape that we did in front of Bell High School, which is in northern Gilchrist County where I'm from, and it is right on the main highway that goes through Bell, is going to receive the Florida Friendly Landscaping Award later this year. So very excited about that. And there are pictures of that on our Facebook page if you want to check out that project. So why are Florida native plants important, and why should you put them in your yard? Well, Florida native plants are a very important part of our ecosystem here in Florida. They provide food and shelter for a lot of our native species. There are about 2,800 plants native to Florida, and of them, about 11% are endemic, which means that they only occur somewhere here in Florida or in this general region. Some may go over state lines because, you know, plants don't really pay attention to state lines. They just pay attention to the habitat that they're happy in. Of those endemic plants, most of the ones that are only endemic here in Florida, a lot of them are in upland habitats, so dry, well-drained, sandhills, pine rocklands, things like that. And as you know, those are the areas that a lot of builders prefer. So that's why they're rapidly disappearing here. So why should you landscape with native plants in your yard? You can protect water quality by using less fertilizer and pesticides, allowing the natural ecosystem to occur in your yard. You can conserve water. Once the plants are established, they generally don't need supplemental irrigation. And you can preserve and restore biodiversity. So like I was saying, with a lot of developments, currently plants that are often installed are not native to Florida, and they may or may not support wildlife. But if you have at least 80% native plants in your yard, you can create a great deal of habitat for Florida wildlife. So again, native plants provide food for lots of different species, as well as shelter for native species. You can really enjoy watching the seasons change here in Florida and watching the interactions between the native plants and the wildlife in your yard. And generally it means less maintenance for an established native landscape. So I like to start with the basics, which in my opinion is providing insects, which starts sort of the food web that then feeds, you know, reptiles and birds and other mammals, and including those are a lot of different caterpillars. Although some caterpillars are not edible to wildlife, many of them are. And that's kind of one of my specialties, is having a lot of stuff for birds, butterflies, and pollinators. Generally speaking, native plants have evolved with the wildlife and insects that they support. So they're not going to be completely killed, even though you might see a caterpillar completely eat all the host plant that it's living on. Whether it's the leaves or the stem or completely to the ground, it's still going to come back from the established root system. So a lot of people think, oh my gosh, these caterpillars have completely decimated my plants. They've killed it. Now what do I do? Just wait. It'll come back. So some of these pictures here on the right-hand side. The top right is your native butterfly weed, or Asclepias tuberosa, which has some of the queen caterpillars on it. So if you know that you want to attract a particular species of butterfly caterpillar, then you would plant their host plants. There in the middle is what they often call the orange dog, which is the caterpillar to the giant swallowtail, and that feeds on wild lime. And then on the bottom right, it's kind of hard to see, but that is the eastern black swallowtail feeding on mock bishopweed, which looks a lot like the culinary dill, but it's a little bit different. So caterpillars are very high in protein, and they're needed for the adult birds to raise their young. It's a very important part of the food chain that you want to include in your yards. And I generally do not spray anything in the nursery or in my yard. I just let the natural cycle occur. At the most, I might kind of squish some aphids now and then if I don't have enough ladybug larvae in the area that I notice, or some of the praying manids or something like that. But generally, if I wait a day or two, I'll see the predatory insects cleaning up for me. So again, there are specific host plants for your caterpillars. This particular one that most everybody is familiar with are the native milkweeds. And of course, they are the hosts for the monarch and the queen butterfly caterpillars. Generally speaking, there's about 3 or 4 native milkweed species that are fairly readily available at native nurseries, which is the butterfly weed that was on the previous slide. That's the tuberosa, which is a sandhill species. The swamp milkweed, which is that pink flower there on the right in the middle. And then it's also the same one that has the queen caterpillar in the left middle. And then the aquatic milkweed, which is not pictured here, but that also has white flowers. On the far right is the world milkweed, which is another sandhill species, and that has kind of a creamy off-white color and very small needle-like leaves, which is seemingly a little bit easier to grow than some of the other sandhill species. And on the far left is one that I'm actually blessed to have on our property that we're moving to, called clasping milkweed, and that's another sandhill species, but I have not been successful in propagating that as of yet. Still working on it.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So, in your experience, have you had good success with milk vines, like the twine vine further south and the swallowwort, and then like the matlaea?
I have only tried the matlaea, and I've had pretty good success with that one. But it's not real happy in containers for very long. It really needs to get in the ground. The sooner the better.
But those are options for queens as well.
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of people ask, do I really need to get rid of my exotic invasive plants? They're so pretty. They, some of them do provide some nectar for pollinators. And I always say, yes, absolutely. Get rid of it. If it displaces a native plant, if it disrupts a native ecosystem, spend the time, get rid of it now before it's even more of a nuisance down the road. Believe me, it will become more of a nuisance down the road. And these are some of the species that are often found in this area. The air potato, the second from the bottom, UF has done a lot of research, and they do actually have some beetles that you can release if you get a hold of the Doyle Connor building there in Gainesville. You can get those seasonally to release when the air potatoes are actively growing. This is kind of a controversial subject. Should you have lawn or not? I say you can have lawn, but try to reduce it as much as possible and replace what you can with Florida native plants that either perform a similar ground cover option for you, but still provides nectar or food for pollinators, or just generally reduce the amount of lawn that you need. If you're not going to be out there playing football in a large area, then you don't need that much lawn. And it also reduces the use of pesticides, fertilizers, gas, all that kind of stuff. Uh-oh. There we go. So a lot of people talk about at shows that we do, native plants. I want a no maintenance yard. There's no such thing as a no maintenance yard. There can be low maintenance once it's established. But if you think that a no maintenance yard is what you're going to have, your neighbors are not going to be happy with you, and you may not be happy with what you're looking at out your window either. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your planning. Planning goes a long way rather than just haphazardly putting stuff out there. Try to come up with a plan before you get started. Things like clustering plants in beds with defined edges gives it more of a neat, maintained appearance, so that if you're in a neighborhood where that is desired, then that's going to make your neighbors happier with your native plants. And I find that grouping plants, not just having one of everything that you possibly can. Biodiversity is great, but that also looks kind of messy. So unless you're going for a meadow look, try to cluster similar plants. And believe it or not, that actually makes them more visible to the pollinators that are coming through your yard as well. And take time, observing your yard. A lot of people that I talk to have moved here from somewhere else, or they've moved here from somewhere else in the state or what have you. Pay attention, to the light, the soil, the changes that happen throughout the year in your yard so that you can actually pick out the right plants. Because I can't tell you how many times people tell me that they have partial shade or they have full sun, and then come to find out that's not really what they have when things change. So you need to pay attention to that. This is a great native plant. It feeds more pollinators than any other native plant that I'm aware of in the state. However, it can be aggressive and it can have a weedy appearance. I personally leave a natural area of it in my yard, but I have a lot of area. And when it kind of gets a little out of control, then it either gets burned, the goats eat it, or we mow it over. But if you're in a neighborhood where things need to look a little bit neater, you might want to avoid the bidens. And they are actually edible too. So how do you pick out the right native plants? Talking to other people in your area about what they've been successful with in their yards. Paying attention, like we talked about, with your light situation, your soil types, what you want to attract to your yard, making notes, reading what you can, asking questions in a lot of groups. This one, the Native Plants of Florida group, and then the Florida Native Plant Society members only group are really great. Although sometimes in some of those threads you will see people commenting about non-native plants. So do be aware and do your research, although usually they're corrected within 24 hours about non-natives on there. So some additional resources that you might use besides the FMPS website are the Plant Real Florida website or the Florida Wildflower Foundation website are all really great resources, and their members, which I'm a member of all of those. There are lots of wonderful books. A lot of times you can get these through online purchases. You can get them generally at the annual chapter or the annual conference, and sometimes at chapter meetings. I know a lot of speakers generally will visit and sell some of their books when they visit. This is a relatively newer one that's kind of a nice step-by-step designing tool, and most libraries are starting to carry these as well. So again, understanding your conditions. Full sun is 6 hours of sun up to midday. Part sun is 3 to 6 hours of sun. Shade is little to no midday sun or kind of filtered sun throughout the day. Pay attention to your soil moisture seasonally. It can change vastly throughout the year. You may have areas that puddle during the rain season, in the summer around June, July. Are you near wetlands? Do you have runoff? Does it stay for more than a part of a day, or does it stay for several days? If it's really sandy, it's going to run off right away. Just pay attention to what that's like and choose the right plants for it. You also want to consider the proper plant heights. A lot of people will get something that's maybe a little bit taller than what they really want for that area, but then they end up either spending a lot of time pruning or hiring somebody to do pruning. But it's a lot better if you can find a shrub that's actually going to be the mature height that you're looking for. Be aware of if it's winter dormant. One of the first things I look at is, of course, what wildlife and pollinators it supports, because that's one of my main things that I'm growing native plants for. And then, what's the flower like? Is it fragrant? Is it toxic to animals? Is it toxic to you? That kind of stuff. So there is a native landscaping plant guide that's available, I think, for $2. So the next several slides are going to describe how to read these charts. And this is focused on North Central Florida. So in the 9 categories of the Florida-friendly landscaping principles, right plant, right place is one of the key elements of that. So you want to look at the chart of full sun, part sun, or shade. And usually each one of those has 4 descriptions, which includes your height, whether it's a flower, a vine, a shrub, or a tree, if it's a perennial or an annual. Of course, perennials come back year after year. Annuals complete their life cycle within 1 year, although sometimes annuals will reseed themselves and you'll have more the following year. Other key factors are, whether it attracts pollinators, does it support wildlife? Again, is it winter dormant? Is it toxic to you? So you can also look at the soils and compare across the sun, part sun, or shade on that chart. What happened? So this is an example of that chart that shows you some of the specific plants that like full sun, drier soils. It includes their height, if it's a shrub or if it's a wildflower, that kind of stuff. And that chart is just sort of a basic sampling of some of the things that most people are successful with when they start with native plants. So this is one of the vines that I actually brought this evening. This is coral honeysuckle. It's great for hummingbirds, and I've even seen some bumblebees on this and some of the larger butterflies like the swallowtails that have proboscis that can get down to the nectar in that flower. You'll sometimes see them nectaring on there as well. It's semi-evergreen. It does drop some of its leaves, but you can see the ones there. They've been outside. I don't cover my native plants. With the exception of the wild lime, because it's marginal. It's really not exactly for North Central Florida, but I baby that one. It's a long-lived perennial. It's a great vine. It covers fences and creates screens. It also provides berries for birds, and it's a great nesting area for a lot of songbirds as well. So here's another example of full sun for average drained soils. And again, it has shrubs, perennials, and some ground covers there that tell you about what they attract. This is a nice ground cover for full sun if it's more moist soil, or partial shade if it's a little bit more dry soil. That's the blue-eyed grass. It spreads very well. It almost looks like a little iris. And I do see a lot of pollinators on that one when it's in bloom. Here's another one for full sun wet soils. You'll see a lot of different shrubs and perennial plants on there as well, with their mature heights and what they attract and things of that nature. So the one we selected from that is the blue flag iris, which you'll see, in a lot of the wetlands and even sometimes on the roadsides. If DOT isn't mowing the ditches, you'll see a lot of that blooming in the summer and fall. They do attract a lot of your native butterflies and sometimes hummingbirds. They are generally dormant in the winter, although mine are not completely dormant. And we've had probably upper teens to low 20s a few times now. So here are some that are more for part sun or shade with drier soils. And I did bring a couple of the blue curls that will tolerate that condition. And then also the black-eyed Susan. A lot of people think of that as strictly full sun, but it will take a little bit of shade, and sometimes they'll take a little bit more moist soils.
Heather, could you explain a little about black-eyed Susan, the Florida type versus the stuff that you find in box stores?
So there are several different species of black-eyed Susans. I believe there are 3 that are native to Florida. I grow 2 of them, the fulgida and the hirta. The ones that you find in the stores are usually cultivated selections of those, and they may or may not be as attractive to the native pollinators as what the native plant species are that are not cultivars. So again, here are some examples for part sun. They have the beautyberry, which is an edible shrub for both us and for wildlife. It's also great for insect repellent. I find that it irritates my skin, so I do kind of a sun tea steeping and then spray it on. It usually lasts a couple weeks in the container that you steep it in. And then lots of wildflowers and some ground covers. And again, you can look at all of these on the handouts. This is one of my favorite ground covers. It is nearly bulletproof once it gets established. It has a very long taproot, so be sure that you want it where you plant it, because it's hard to get rid of once you put it there. But it's great for pollinators. It's, again, very drought tolerant. You can literally drive over it to some degree. You can mow over it to some degree. It tolerates pretty heavy foot traffic, and it is a host plant for the sulfur butterfly as well as a nectar source for a lot of the pollinators. I think DOT should put it everywhere, personally. Here are some more for part sun and more moist soils. Again, you have some of the shrubs up top, the fetterbush and the highbush blueberries, the Florida string lily there in the middle, and the royal fern, and then the Carolina jessamine and the obedient plant there on the bottom. And the highbush blueberry is a Florida native. It can get anywhere from 6 to 12 feet tall. There are several different blueberry species that are native here in Florida. This is actually the plant that a lot of the commercial blueberries are selected from. So they're hybridized from this plant. It does have small flowers, and particularly the blueberry bees love Florida blueberries. It does produce an edible fruit for both us and for wildlife. And then there are plants that also like shade that prefer drier soils. So the climbing hydrangea, the Carolina petunia, the tropical sage, and the leerleaf sage are some that are very tolerant from my experience. Tropical sage is a fabulous plant. It does reseed readily, so if you don't want it to spread to a lot of other areas, you can deadhead it after the blooms. But keep in mind that a lot of times seeds are eaten by birds, so You may want to leave some of those. It's great for hummingbirds and some of the larger butterflies, and it can get anywhere from 3 to 6 feet tall. It is deciduous in a hard freeze, so it does freeze back, but the ones in my yard are still kind of going in the partial shade areas. So here are plants for shade and average soils. The one in the top right, that bloom that you see is the crossvine. That's another one of the vines that I brought this evening. It's another great one for hummingbirds, great for all types of bees because it's a wider mouth flower, so a lot of them can get down in there and get the nectar. And it's also a good one for butterflies. And then Kunti is one of our prehistoric plants. It's been here since the dinosaurs roamed the earth. I think it's fabulous. It's a host plant in South Florida for the Atla butterfly. They don't quite come this far north, but the plant thrives here, and it can grow, I've found, in full sun to well-drained soils, average, even in a lot of disturbed sites where the soils are compacted, this plant will grow and thrive. The American wisteria is different than the Chinese wisteria that you see everywhere. The Chinese wisteria is an invasive. It has pendulous flowers, meaning they hang down. The American wisteria, the flowers grow up. They are also fragrant, and it is not one that's going to take over the world. You know, it's a little bit better behaved, so your neighbors won't hate you for planting it. And it smells just as good as the invasive stuff. There's the Kunti again, a little up close picture. That's the seed right there. It kind of looks like a brown corn cob when it first starts, and then it opens up and you can see the orange fleshy stuff. And then inside that orange flesh, there's actually a small little oblong sort of tan seed. It does contain a little bit of cyanide, so I generally just spread these out in a shady area in the ground and let the native insects kind of chew the stuff off. And once you get the first true set of cotyledons, then I might transplant them somewhere else where I want them. Here's another option for shade and then wet soils. So in the upper right, it has Dahoon holly. That's a tree, mid-sized tree. On the left, there's cinnamon fern. In the middle is Virginia willow, which is a small tree. And then the bottom right is lizard's tail. That's a perennial. So the Dahoon holly and most of your other hollies all have white flowers that the pollinators love. They have the red berries that a lot of the migrating songbirds and even the year-round songbirds enjoy in the winter. And a lot of people use them for holiday decorations as well. Although be careful not to take all of them, leave some for the birds. So if you still have questions about native plants, you can always contact me at the nursery there in Trenton. I find that text or email works better because I have a full-time job besides the farm and nursery that I have at home. So it gives me the flexibility to get back to you when I can. I strongly encourage you to attend any FMPS field trips that you can. Be aware that you don't have to only go to your own chapter field trips. You can visit other chapters and go to other areas of the state. You just need to contact the field trip coordinator and ask them what their current stipulations are with COVID and everything. And then I encourage you to go to local, regional chapter plant sales. I know you guys have your own that you can pre-order. Paynes Prairie up in Gainesville, on the east side of Gainesville, they generally have a spring and a fall sale. It's usually pretty diverse. We've been a vendor there since I think the early 2000s. But it's a great event. I thank you for coming tonight and wanting to learn about native plants, and hopefully encouraging your friends and neighbors and family to do the same and get out there and go native. Here's some other websites that I'll leave up for you as well that you can visit for more information. We already talked about the Florida Wildflower Foundation and the Plant Real Florida, but that one at the top, audubon.org, Plants for Birds, that's a really great one that you can search by type of plant or by the type of bird that you're looking to attract. So you know what you need to put in your yard if you're wanting to have certain ones visit. And then the second from the bottom is the Florida Friendly Landscaping 9 Principle information. And of course, the General Gardening Solutions is the UFIFIS website. Any questions?
I have a question.
Okay.
I like to ask nursery people what your favorite plant is, kind of for the general public, like a tough plant that'll take those semi-dry locations, and like a plant that'll do shade, or a plant that does what.
Okay. It's hard to pick just one.
Yeah.
But for shade, I would say probably either leer leaf sage or the creeping sage. They're nearly indestructible. They bloom throughout most of the year and provide for a lot of pollinators. For wet areas, I really like the native canna, the yellow canna. It gets pretty tall, so if you're wanting something maybe a little bit smaller, you could do some of the blue flag iris or the prairie iris. And then for sunny areas, perennial wise, I would say probably something like the black-eyed Susans, the not the threadleaf coreopsis, the lance-leaf coreopsis, the Coreopsis lanceolata. Those are really easy to grow ones, I would say.
I like the landscape coreopsis because it stays good green during the freezes.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, there are some that still have green in the nursery in the little 4-inch pots.
What was that coreopsis?
Coreopsis lanceolata or lance-leaf coreopsis. Tick seed is another name for it, but most of the coreopsis common names are tick seed, so that can be confusing. Yes, sir.
What does it mean when a plant's called naturalized?
So it generally means that it's not native to that area, but it has spread in that area as if a native would. But a naturalized plant may or may not be an exotic invasive.
Bad or ugly, you're not sure.
Right. You would have to find out if it's an exotic invasive or not. Yes, ma'am.
So I'm putting native plants all through my yard, but I'm in an HOA that's incredibly oppressive.
Okay.
So I know native plants, they can't prevent you from planting native plants. But are they like protected in that, can they dictate to me which native plants I can plant and which ones I can't plant?
There is a statute that protects the ability to use native plants in your yard, but you still have to go through the approval process, I believe, of your HOA.
Right.
And if you give me your email information, I can send you that link. I don't remember it off the top of my head, but I can get it for you.
Well, I am aware of the statute, I just didn't know if they, once I gone through the approval process, but I have a feeling when they didn't know.
Yeah.
And I am adding some that weren't in the original plan, and I'm just not sure if they can make me take them out once they see how big they are, what they look like, if they like them or don't like them.
I think if it's already been approved, I don't think they can make you remove it. But I do find that if you can include links or pictures with the application that you're going through with your HOA, that does help a lot. And if you can list what sort of wildlife it supports and, what your goals are and why you're trying to use those native plants, that generally helps the board or governing body,
Well, I think their issue is going to be more, like I am trying to screen an area from the disaster, just a very big eyesore. And I'm using all native plants, and I just don't know if they have the right to tell me I have to remove them.
Did you have that area approved as well?
Well, again, I've added some to the plan,
Mm-hmm.
and they say you can make minor modifications. You don't have to do for every single thing. you don't go through this whole process. But I'm just wondering, again, if native plants get any kind of protected status.
They do. You had a question?
Yes, the American wisteria,
Mhm.
is that a vine too?
It is, yes.
And does it climb on the trees? Does it
It will,
climb
yes. It will climb on a fence or a tree or whatever you have to support it.
there? Is it white or lavender?
It's lavender.
But the flowers don't hang down.
No. The ones that hang down are the invasive Chinese wisteria. The ones that grow up, and they're generally a little bit shorter, about that tall, are the American wisteria.
I've never seen it in the wild. Where can you see it in the wild?
That's a good question. And I'd have to look on the plant atlas to tell you. Yes.
I have quite a few neighbors in the yard that got hit really bad with the frost. Should I just put them back to
No.
the ground? Just leave them
No,
alone?
wait. And so
The native morning glory
if you cut things back now before we're finished with frost, that might encourage new growth that will then also get hit by future frost
Okay.
and potentially damage the plant more. Whereas if you leave the brown foliage and stems and such until after chance of frost, then that will help protect the plants. And it actually provides habitat for a lot of the native pollinators. You know, there are a lot of dormant stems and things that native insects need. Any other questions?
When's the last frost?
Depends on who you talk to. A lot of people say March 15th. I know where I am, I always tell people not to cut anything back until the second week of April, because generally one more full moon around Easter brings a late spring frost with it. Even if it's a light one, it can do some damage.
That's a long time to look at that mess.
It is. Welcome to North Florida. It is. It creates habitat.
Yep.
Thank you very much for having me this evening.
So I also forgot to mention, we'll be doing our plant drying next, but our plant sale, we had planned to start this month and run to next month, but our plant vendor doesn't have a confirmation on their inventory. So we're pushing it back 1 month. We should be releasing the plant sale order forms at the next meeting and on our website, and then it'll run until the April meeting, and that'll be our plant sale. Yes, Jim?
Are we using the same vendor that we used last year?
That depends on the inventory issue. Okay, so do we want to do the tickets? Okay. Oh, and Sue may have something.
Yep, although Barbara McCormick is out ill, and so she wasn't able to come here and do Barbara's bits, the one thing that she did want me to bring to everybody's attention is to repeat what Heather said there about plants and cutting them back. Do not cut your plants back. I know they're kind of messy right now, but do not cut anything back until the danger of frost is gone. Leave them, leave the dead plants as they are. Give the little critters places to be and let the plants just hunker down all by themselves.
So I'm going to cut off the show for our people at home, since we'll get back to our meeting business, and we'll do our starter drawing. $49.50. Is that right? $51.12.
That's me.
Oh, that's me. 5109, that might be Sue again. Yep. 5095 and 5137.
5116. 5094. 5107.
Okay, I'm sorry.
5092. 5136. Just for the record, planted on the left of the cell, not part of the plant. 5105. Oh, 5103. I think we have one more, right? That was five, right? Trying to get one, and then one. Five more. That's the one with the. 5099. I think that's it. Is that all of them? I think that's it. So if anybody has any questions about Heather's plant or would like to go shopping, definitely go take. And thank you for coming tonight, guys.
So anyway, I didn't do it. So I looked on this one here. I knew where the left was.